Hot topic right now, and a North Carolina senator is calling on the Justice Department to review her state's new voter ID law. Critics say that these laws infringe on the rights of citizens, but supporters say that the legislation helps to crack down on voter fraud. Our own Juan Williams and Charles Krauthammer debated this in a heated discussion last night. Watch some of this.
We have fly-speck surveillance of our elections in this country, and if there was any evidence that any Democrat was pursuing cheating in this manner, boy, would Republicans be ballistic, Charles.
If you believe that our elections are clean, you believe that the baseball is clean. I'm not sure either is true.
Well, there you go. So North Carolina is among more than 30 states now that do have some kind of voter ID law. More than half the country has these laws in place that North Carolina is now to enact. Joined now to discuss this by our friends Alan Colmes, host of the Alan Colmes radio show, and Rich Lowry, editor of the National Review. Both are Fox News contributors. Welcome to you both.
Good morning.
Alan, let me start with you. What do you think of the back and forth last night between Charles Krauthammer and Juan?
I'm on Team Juan. Let's be clear. What's happening in North Carolina, and I do like Charles, but in this one I agree with Juan. What's happening in North Carolina isn't just voter ID. They're restricting early voting. They're restricting days you can vote. This is particularly aimed at, they know it's going to be aimed at people who are going to vote Democratic. In Pennsylvania, with this voter ID, Mike Tarzai, the majority leader of the House, said it's to help Romney win. They've admitted it. That's what this is about, because there are very few incidents of voter fraud that takes place at the voting booth. Most of it happens with absentee voting, or it happens in other times that you're voting, but not at the voting booth. Absentee voting usually, or when you register to vote. Rich, what do you say?
I think that's just ridiculous. Look, this North Carolina law is common sense. You have to show an ID to get into this building. You should have to show an ID to vote. And they are reducing the number of days for early voting in North Carolina, but they're going to increase the number of sites and increase the number of hours, because the goal is to keep the total hours available for early voting exactly the same. And here we are, we're in New York, which doesn't have no questions asked early voting the way North Carolina does. So North Carolina is more liberal on this than New York is. So I guess Alan wants the Justice Department to come in here and change New York State's voting laws because they're discriminatory against minorities.
I guess I'll just move to North Carolina.
Yeah, look, exactly. They have more liberal laws.
Look, the Brennan Center at NYU and also Knight Carnegie Initiative have both done studies on this. They found since 2000 there have been 633 cases of voter fraud, almost all of which are early, which are absentee voting or registration voting. That's where you show the ID. This research shows this is
evading my point now. Does New York have a system that's more hostile to minorities than North Carolina?
Not that I'm aware of, but
New York doesn't have early voting. So by your logic, it does.
But they're not narrowing what already exists in New York. In North Carolina,
but North Carolina is still going to be more liberal than New York.
I have a question for Alan. Alan, just on the very basic sense of this, right? Why would you object to asking someone to get an ID? It's free. They're going to make birth certificates and all of the other documents available free of charge to anybody who needs them. Plus, they have 2 years to get an ID. What is the big deal with asking someone to get an ID?
I thought conservatives were against unnecessary legislation. This is a problem that does not exist. It has already been admitted.
Why are you so sensitive about asking someone to get an ID is my question, because as we point out, we needed to get in the building, you needed to buy Sudafed, so what's the big deal?
You need an ID when you register to vote. Voting is a right, as Juan Williams pointed out last night. This is purely for the purpose of narrowing the Democratic vote. It's a restriction, and that's exactly why they're doing it. And it's actually an outrage. It's an outrage that they're doing this.
No, there's no evidence whatsoever in the states that have adopted these laws, and most have, that it suppresses turnout. There's no evidence whatsoever.
They haven't adopted these laws.
You're making it up.
They haven't been allowed to adopt these laws, and they haven't been in place long enough to do any data on it.
Yes, they have. The Supreme Court blessed.
You guys are fired up today. Hold on, guys. I'm going to play a soundbite now from Hillary Clinton on this. I want you to hear it, and I want to get your thoughts. Let's play it.
Now, not every obstacle is related to race, but anyone who says that racial discrimination is no longer a problem in American elections must not be paying attention.
Well, the Supreme Court thinks that we are past the point where states need to get their permission to change their voter laws.
Well, you know, a lot of conservatives don't agree with the Supreme Court on how they voted on the Affordable Care Act. I don't always agree with the Supreme Court either.
But Alan, a few years ago, the Supreme Court voted 6-3 to hold up Indiana's voter ID law.
I'm not no obligation to agree with the Supreme Court.
So, and these voter ID laws have been in place in a bunch of states for years now, and there is zero evidence that they've suppressed voter turnout.
Why do you think it is that after the Supreme Court ruled on the Voting Rights Act, all of a sudden it was only the red states with red state governors, with Republican legislatures that went and rushed to try to get in voter ID as soon as they could? Why only red states? Why do you think that is?
Because they're more commonsensical on these matters, because voter ID is common sense, Alan.
Right.
And again,
it's a problem in search of
you cannot get around the fact that New York has a more restrictive law on early voting than North Carolina does, even after this change.
He's going to leave right here and fight about that out in the streets of New York City. Alan, thank you. Rich, thank you. This is a hot one, folks. This because we're going to
go duke it out.
See you in the hallway, gentlemen. All right, we'll bring our cameras too.